Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about context engineering. It's been a topic that's been kind of popular in the broad community of AI and software development for the last little bit here. And after Karpathy responded to that tweet talking about it and trying not to quote another term, and I think that it's still kind of front of mind for everybody, but it's still getting a little bit lost in the weeds in terms of the terminology. So I want to throw my 2 cents in. I think I feel that I have some value to add. For what it's worth, I'm a CTO here in Australia, working with a fintech company, and I've been in the software industry for well over 10 years, and have been sort of working around machine learning or looking at it or engaged with the space for a little while, and then haven't necessarily always been actually developing actively with it, but am now and sort of have been paying attention to it recently. And I have this sort of sentiment that context engineering is the term that's kind of getting butchered and used in ways that it doesn't necessarily, or I don't think it was originally intended for. But I do think that it's something that we should all be paying attention to. And I think the long and short of it is that when we're working with LLMs, we should try to give them the information that they need to make the decision that they need to make. And no more than that. Don't aim to have the right amount of information rather than far too little or far too much. I'm going to touch really quickly on very high level how LLMs work, because it helps put into perspective the reason that context engineering sort of is important. But if you're broadly familiar with transformer layers and how that architecture works, and this is part of a video that you could skip, effectively. I put this together in V0, by the way. If you haven't had a play, it's pretty cool. But effectively, when we have words, we take the tokens. I say words here, but it's tokens more specifically. They get translated to vectors in high dimensional space with a semantic understanding, a positional understanding, and then they use attention to change each of these, which suffice to say that we kind of take the language that we interpret and use the same kind of underlying processes that are happening in our minds to turn them into vector or mathematical representations of the words. And so in this little diagram, each of these little lights represents a value between, well, a real number, and vector math is applied to each of them. I believe in the case of semantic and positional, it's just additive, and that's actually true for attentional as well. I've got the multiplication symbol here, but ultimately you take what would have been the language looked up in a graph against a vector ID or a vector that goes into a feed forward layer. And there's probably a bit more complexity to it. Like I said, I'm not necessarily a master of this space, but I know enough, to infer some things about context engineering. But the reason that I use this little indicator is because, in this little example, we've got 20 nodes, and the word the lazy dog, or the words the lazy dogs, light up a fistful of nodes here, and that's sort of supposed to loosely be indicative of or sort of representing vector space being kind of lit up and then being applied into a limited number of points that we can sort of reference, and these then go into this feed forward matrix, which is, again, it's just matrix math that's kind of applied. And the weights that are in between these sections, and if you want to learn more about transformer feed-forward matrices, or for neural nets, or for how word processing works, 3 brown, 1 blue do a great video on it. I'll link it as well. But the point is that you kind of have this limited space that you can put information into, and if you put more words into that limited space, each of these dots would get, some more lights would light up as you get more words, and you will dull others to help show the differentiation of the content that's been put in. But at some point, any given word is getting kind of dulled out by the other words that are in the sentence. And so I tried to indicate what this might look like by having loads of words, and for some reason V0 wants to flip these words sometimes. It hasn't done it for me now, which is nice. But if all of the lights are lit up, and the reality is it would just be different lights lit up different amounts. But if there's some level of noise happening in the system such that when you get an output it looks less deterministic, or less sort of pointing specifically to one place, then even though we only have 3 points here that we really care about, they kind of get lost in the noise. And so a very quick example of this, talking to an LLM might be, you want to say, I went over to Japan. This is every Australian apparently now. I went over to Japan and I ate lots of food and I walked a lot. And so I'd really like to try to mimic the diet that I had over there because obviously it helped me lose weight. But you have this long conversation about how much you enjoyed being over there and how you went skiing and rah, rah, rah. And this kind of represents filling the context with the chat bot. You talking about your entire history, and then at the end you kind of say like, hey, can you make me a meal plan that matches what it was like to be living in Japan? And the 3 dots really should be Japanese food, lose weight, and make a meal plan, please. And then maybe you say like a period of the meal plan that you want. But it's got all this other noise in here. And so, even if that, by the nature of the way the sort of semantic transforming happened, this section up here, attention is the concept. Attention is all you need is the paper that was handled by Google, I think in 2017, something like that, which kind of was the first real pointing towards what now became the math behind neural processing that we use as LLMs, i.e. ChatGPT. That's a lot of letters in that sentence, but basically we end up this math that gets done should kind of infer that is ultimately what that entire sentence was meant to be. But there is still a lot of other noise, and so even if the important bits are present, and they might be more prevalent than the other stuff, there is still more stuff. There's more just noise in the system, and so. Ideally, you can get to the place where you feed it exactly the right information. And so now when we take this to the idea of programming, which I think, it's the space that I am sort of spending the most time with LLMs, and it's the space that I think that we have in the immediate future. It's the sort of most kind of push the needle, push the lever, kind of really make the difference space. And so I've been paying a lot of attention to it, and I've spent enough time working with the code programs or coding agents rather, like Claude Code specifically, to kind of get a sense of the things that are really, moving the needle there. So the biggest thing I think is that every time you write a prompt into Claude Code, into these agentic models broadly, we're all putting CLAUDE.md files in the top of our folder to give it some instruction about how commands that you can run, the kind of broad folder structure that you have. You should be putting in there like why this project exists. If you don't have that already, go pop that in there. I found also that I'm spending some time putting in a bit of semantic logic or business logic that I have, so that when I type a prompt, I don't have to kind of do the translation into the specific files every single time. It's often worth doing anyway, because I'm sure lots of people have experienced this, but the smaller you make the task, the kind of better it is at going and executing it. If you really point it, you say like, hey, go to the email sender.py and alter the function blah to this other change. It'll go and nail that. And if you kind of just say there's a problem with the emails, it does have more difficulty kind of narrowing in there. But what I wanted to indicate is that based on this context engineering being a problem, don't make your CLAUDE.md really, really long so that you've got, don't have instructions on how to do TDD in there, as well as here's the massive folder structure, here's what the home.jsx, here's what the login.jsx does. This is the problem that we're often having over here. Please don't forget to make sure that when you commit, don't put Claude in the commit message, all of this sort of stuff. If you put all of that in the file, it will forget it because it's going to get drowned out by the rest of the information that you put in. And I think more importantly, you have a 2,000 token long CLAUDE.md file, and you write a prompt that just says, hey, can you go to the login page and update the button to be blue? The only thing you care about in that moment is getting it to that file, it understanding what blue might infer if that color is specific, and then being able to make that change. And now it's sort of overburdened with, let's say 500 tokens about, how the form handler works. And so the easiest win, and I'm not doing anything special here. Anthropic literally have this in their documents. I just think that it's kind of underutilized. Go and make your CLAUDE.md files thinner. Go and make them as thin as you functionally can. I have been putting a brief description of what the project is, very broadly how to navigate it, and I mean only in the sense that they can kind of go, if you need to deal with the interface stuff, it'll be in the pages section. And if you need to deal with a user service, go to the user service section. And then the CLAUDE.mds set up in those folders as it navigates into the folders, it'll actually pick that up. That's part of the way that the tool works. And so you can have a bit more information here. You can get as lower level as talking about the way that the functions in here work if you like. And ideally, you can talk to Claude at the top level, ask it a very broad question, and it'll sort of navigate to the right place. And it'll pull in the context as it needs it rather than kind of having it all up front. And then your little question about the blue button is fed 500 tokens saying, hey, make sure you do TDD, and then kind of go and do it at the pages section. I would even go as far as, I think if this was my project, this is just a dummy that spits out from with the V0 mapping, but I would even go as far as to say, if this was my project, I would probably take the pains to put each of these files in their own subfolder, almost exclusively just to be able to stick a CLAUDE.md file in there, and then describe roughly what they are and how the components go there. And now you won't always hit them because sometimes it might want to go straight to a component, but if it's set up properly and you ask and you kind of prompt it correctly, it will loop that way, and it'll pick up the context. That's pretty much it. Put thin CLAUDE.mds all out throughout your files. Be conscious of the way that context works. I think that's it for now. Have a good one. Thanks.